You talk about on page 14 and really talking about choosing to forgive the imaginary conversations. Um, we've all had those. We kind of mentioned about those a minute ago, where and I went full bore with this, where I would have the full conversation. I would play both roles, what I would like to say to the people, and all of these. I was much bolder in those conversations, in those times alone. Uh, I think my wife looked at me thinking something was really wrong with me because I was having this full on conversation. Talk about shutting those down and why it's so important to just to win those battles and just not let yourself do that.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, when I had those conversations, part of the reason, at least for the why I did, is because we were given no opportunity to say goodbye,
Mm,
no opportunity
Mm.
to give our story. It was just like, poof, you're gone, done. And so my conversations were, boy, if I ran into so and so, here's what I would say, and I would, that is, it's harmful.
Yeah.
There's no good that comes from that. And then the fact is, our minds are so powerful.
mm,
God has created us in such a way that our brains and our thought processes have such power, and they can, our minds can lead us to anxiety depending on what we're thinking about.
mm.
And when there's anxiety, Paul talks about be anxious for nothing. Well, okay, and then he gives the solution, which is to pray, and then he lists all these things that you should think about, that you
Mm.
focus your mind on. So where we focus our mind is, if we're focusing on the things of God, on those things that are good and honest and just, that is the antidote to anxiety. And Isaiah says that we're going to have perfect peace when our minds are focused on God. And so there's nothing good that comes out of these imaginary conversations with those who caused us such harm. Now, if you have a scheduled meeting, let's say you're meeting somebody for coffee, because I don't know, maybe they want to, I don't know, I can't even imagine. But if there was a scheduled meeting, yes, think through what you're going to say. All right, you need to do that. But I'm talking about those imaginary conversations that happen many times in the middle of the night. Boy, here's what I'd like to say to them.
Mm-hmm.
Those things, just doesn't help. And I'm always very eloquent in those.
Oh, I'm the best speaker in the world.
Oh, yeah.
In those.
Yes.
And the person I'm mad about is just a bumbling idiot. I mean, I've not lost a single argument by myself.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I will say again, a professional counselor can help you process what you're going through and give you some tools to help you move away from those imaginary conversations. I came to the point where I had to recite a scripture verse. If those imaginary conversations started, I had to just start, usually it was Psalm 19:14, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart, okay, be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and redeemer. That's what, because that verse really nailed it, okay? My imaginary conversations were not acceptable in God's sight. So I had to quote that verse, though, to push the conversations out.
Preach and teach to yourself and teach to your own heart.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the Bible's talking about when it says taking every thought captive. Yes. Being in charge of it. Stephen, what's on your mind, man? You got anything?
Well, I said this before we started the show and stuff, and I want to let everybody know. Anybody who's gone through this, I'm recommending your book 100%, because as I read it, I was like, and I told you this before, I was telling my wife as I was reading, I was like, oh my goodness, she put down on paper all the stuff and the feelings and stuff that we're going through, I was going through, and
Mm.
she actually said it in there. And it gave me, and I really appreciate the work that you did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Because it did give me a sense of, yeah, I'm not alone, because you do feel alone in those situations. And to go back and read that and go, yeah, somebody else has been there. And just how you outlined the, elements of grief. I mean, and I love how your book, the first part of your book, is outlined, hitting every single one of those Kubler-Ross stages, and then just going, this is what this looked like. This is what this looked like for me. This is what this looked like for someone else. I mean, one of the stories you tell about the pastor being, oh my goodness, got bought out. I don't want to say he
Yes.
got bought out, but
Yes.
the church got bought out to fire him, kind of a thing. And I was like, oh, it was one of those things that I didn't have that situation. I could not imagine that. But at least to know that there are other people who have said, okay, my feelings are valid. My feelings are the thoughts that I've had are, okay, this is unfortunately not uncommon. It is common that pastors get treated this way. And there are other people who have made this journey and made it through. So it was a sense of, for anyone, if this is where you're at the beginning, this book will help give you a sense of direction and hope that there is something on the other side. And you've got someone who says, been there, done that. Let me tell you what it was. And then moving through. So that's my biggest thing was just that, having you talk through all those elements as you went through them, and backwards and forwards and back again, it was just such a reassurance. And there is something to be said when it's almost like you're reading in a support group where you're just like, okay, been there. Yeah, been there. Okay. And in there, you're not trying to fix anyone, saying, well, XYZ, this is what you need to do, and it's all much better, kind of a thing. But you're just saying, hey, these are stages. This is what you're going to go with. This is what to expect. This is my story. This is how I felt about it. And it is an incredible book. So yeah, I'm plugging your book right now because it's important to plug it, because it's, that way it's not, what's the word? Self-promotion. No, I'm going to promote it for you, because it's a great read. It flows so well. So those who are not good readers, it's going to be great, because it's as like a conversation. I'm just going to be open with you.
Really
if you're a heavy reader, you'll finish it in like an hour or two. It just flows so great.
I judge books by cups of coffee, and this was about a 1 cup coffee book.
Because you got it done in 1 cup. As you drank 1 cup, you didn't have to. It flowed so well.
Yeah, it was just, I was all the way through it. Deanna, if you've got some time, I've got a couple of more spots I'd like to cover.
Sure.
Something he said earlier made me think of this. We've talked about pastors helping themselves and kind of walking biblically and spiritually through this process. I want to change a little bit, and let's talk about pastors helping others. We've talked about people like us, a little further down the line. When do you know you're ready to help somebody? Because we're wanting to create this pastor network of pastors sharing their story, but also as a pastor or pastor's wife that have been hurt through this. How do you help without diving back into the pit with them, without internalizing the pain and going right back there again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there may be those who can't do it. That it would just they're just not going to go looking backward. God has given me the grace to share my story, to share it repeatedly, to talk and to work with people who are in the trenches going through it again. That is something God has given me. It's like my calling. If a pastor finds themselves trying to help somebody and then they just go spiraling downward, then I don't think God's called you to do that. Just be really, really blunt. I will tell you, for me, for whatever reason, I just get such, energy from the work I do. And that's a God-given thing. Got to tell you a story about my dad. I always love to talk about my dad, but 46 years ago, he had quadruple bypass surgery. And this was when it was a brand new procedure.
Wow.
And after he recovered from that, he started getting phone calls from people saying, "Hey, Bob, my next door neighbor is having bypass surgery. Would you go see him?" Or my uncle's having bypass surgery. Would you go see him? And my dad suddenly started showing up in the hospital rooms of people he did not know, simply to say, "I know what you're facing. I have been there. I've had that surgery. I am now recovered. Look at me now." And so he would just pray with them and encourage them. And I've thought many times that is the ministry God has given me, of being able to say, I know you think you are dying right now. The pain is so immense. But you're going to get through it. And I am living proof of that. And so just to be able to encourage them. And I think even if somebody it's not where I am in my journey, but if they're able to say to somebody, "Hang in there. You're going to see a brighter day. I promise you that much." And I don't know when, but it will come. Just hang in there. And then stay in touch with that person. Call them up a couple of weeks. Say, "How you doing?" You don't have to go through your own story. You just need to be a voice saying, "I hear you. I remember you. You're not alone." And just any phone call, any text message, any contact saying, "I have not forgotten what you are going through." Because unfortunately, people do get forgotten. Once you're no longer at a church, once you can it's no longer, cool to be friends with the pastor. Once your denomination, once you're not helping your denomination by pastoring a church that supports denominational work, you're not helping. Suddenly you're invisible. And so if you are someone who has gone through this and you hear of somebody else, reach out simply to say, "You are not alone, and I have not forgotten you." And neither has God, but you feel like he has. So
yeah.
Oh,
that was one of the striking things of the stories one of the other stories that you told was just how all of a sudden there were your people who were your quote, I think you did put it in quotes, friends.
Yes.
Because you were the pastor or the pastor's wife, they're not around anymore, kind of a thing. And and I told my wife, I said that is so true, because you do truly find out those who are really interested in you as an individual or a relationship with you that wasn't something about gain. And we had a couple of people that kind of reached out, but that I was thankful for and appreciated that. But it was so funny how out of all these people, there's like, "Oh yeah, pastor always be there for you," and evidently not.
Yeah, right. Famous last words of the elders or deacons or whomever.
And I cannot state that enough, and I appreciate you sharing that. A very quick little bit of my journey. One of the events that I went through at the same time I was going through the church event, my wife was going through a major brain surgery, and in a time where she needed the most support, there was no one. And I cannot state enough, it doesn't really matter what you say. It really is a ministry of presence. If you've been through this, especially pastors' wives, pastors themselves, say something. Just say something. Listen. Do something to reach out to them, because those are the boosters in the healing process that give you just a little bit of energy.
Yes.
To just survive maybe just that day, or in a lot of those conversations, those phone calls or letters or whatever, uh, they didn't pay off until later.
Yes.
You know, months down the road, you remember a phone call that you got, or you go back and read a text. Not state that enough. So that one hit my heart.
Yeah. And even if you think, man, I don't know what to say, or perhaps, and this does happen, the pastor and spouse, they just shut down, and they won't answer the phone. They won't answer the door. They're not, they don't, they're in such a low spot
Uh-huh.
that they can't accept. Don't give up. Buy a little potted plant at the grocery store and put a note that says, love you, thinking, praying for you.
Yeah.
Put it on their front porch. They're going to at least find it. You know, something, just, man, keep reaching out. Keep letting them know that you haven't forgotten. And when they are ready to go to coffee, man, you're there for them, or whatever.
Right.
But it's that hanging in there for the long haul that is really, really hard to do. It's just easy to get on with our lives and forget that, oh yeah, this is, 6 months has passed and I haven't reached out to see how they're doing. And it's been a long 6 months for them.
And we think of those things when there's been a physical death or a
Yes.
physical loss of a loved one. But in this phenomenon, it's more of the walking wounded, where they look alive on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
the grief is still the same. And so do some of those same things.
Right. And with technology, man, just pull up your phone, put it in your reminders.
Yeah.
2 weeks from now, have a reminder pop up to reach out to so-and-so. There are a lot of technology can help us remember what we need to be remembering as far as reaching out to people, to pastors and their spouses and their kids. Don't forget the kids, man. They are the collateral damage in this whole mess.
Yeah, and that's one of the questions that I had is, and I admittedly, one of the toughest chapters to read was parenting through grief. You're trying to survive yourself, and then you have to act tough for your children, or you have to bring them through their losses and grief. How do you do that when your reserves are absolutely dry? I mean, how?
Yeah, well, I will tell you up front, both of our kids were out of the house at the time, and I'm grateful for that. I would not, but first of all, it depends on what age your kids are as far as what you can do. Don't be afraid to let them know that you are hurting. One of the important things to do for your kids, though, is to help them separate God from the church. That your grief is because of how people treated you. And yes, we expect more of people in the church, but they are still people who make mistakes. They're people who have sin in their lives, such as we do. Help your kids understand it's those people who have hurt mommy and daddy so deeply. For whatever reason, God allowed it, but God did not do all this. And somehow help your kids separate those two things. Allow your kids, like I said earlier, grief is unique. Allow your kids to grieve however it may be. And it may be hard to, to see them or to listen to them. Who knows what they're going to say. Understand that they're angry. They're so wounded. They're trying to navigate what's happened in the midst of social media, perhaps going to school with kids from the church or teachers who are members of the church. Very difficult for them to navigate. So if at all possible, get professional help for your kids. And I know of some great places that can really help, especially teenagers. So any listeners are welcome to reach out to me, and I can connect you to some folks who are highly trained at helping not just teenagers, but pastors' kids navigate.
Yep. I'm going to put the website up since you're talking about contacting you. Find her at pastorshopenetwork.org. So if you contact to get that information, because that is an important resource to be able to find someone to help with kids to help connect. Yes.
Right. And if at all possible, find a church where you can continue going to church, a church where your kids enjoy, so they can see, oh, not every church is going to hurt us. And that brings up something that I think is incredibly important. And that is to continue worshiping, continue attending a church. And again, if you're in a little town in the middle of nowhere, this is hard to do. But if you can drive even 30 minutes or even an hour to get to a church on Sunday, do it out of sheer obedience. And I credit all this to my husband, because I was so angry when all this came down. And literally a couple of days after the final meeting telling us we were gone, not that we needed to reason, but done, you're out of here. My husband came to me, he said, worship is not an option, it's a command. We are going to worship. I need you to find a church for us to go to. And so thankfully, we lived in a huge metropolitan area. There was a mega church, and that is where we went until we relocated back to our home state. Every Sunday, we got up, we got dressed, we went to this church. It was so big, it could be completely invisible, and that's what we needed at that point. But we heard good biblical teaching. I still have the notes from that Easter Sunday sermon. The point that the preacher made was evil will not win. I thought, man, I feel like it's winning right now, but so important to keep your relationship with God, keep your spiritual life alive and work on it, and out of sheer obedience, if nothing else. And so with your kids as well, man, hopefully you can find a place to continue worshiping. And so your kids can know that, yes, we've been wounded. Those people are not going to take away from us this incredibly important relationship that we have with God and with Jesus Christ. And we are going to be committed to that. So.
Yeah. And I would say it's okay, at least in those first months, to be anonymous in a church. You can share your story with the pastor and say, hey, here's why we're visiting. A couple of different times, I would even, the church would hold my membership, because it was therapeutic for me I'm just going to get my name off of that roll, But you don't have to share, people, you go into church and well-meaning people will say, well, welcome to such and such church. Why are you here?
Yes.
You don't have to share your story. Less is more. So, hey, we're just passing through, something.
Right.
And just sit on the back pew for a little bit. You'll know when it's time to live again.
Right. And I think it's a progress. It was definitely a progression for us. We went from the mega church where we were invisible. Eventually, we relocated back to our home state. We went to a much smaller church that was near my father-in-law's house. And we literally rehearsed our answer, like you said, Matt, of why are you here? And our answer was, we are transitioning back to our home state and looking for jobs. And that's not, nobody asked, because in 2009, everybody was looking for jobs, So we had really crafted our answer. And we had it was a great worshipful experience for us to be there. Then again, when we found jobs, we relocated again. We found a church. We attended worship, and after a while, we got brave enough to go to a small group. That was a huge, huge step. And by that time, it was probably 2 years after the event of being pushed out. So it took a while. And then we started going to the group social gatherings. And again, they just knew us for, okay, this, my husband and I were in nonprofits in town, and that's what they knew about us. We did not share all of our past. And it wasn't until my book came out years later that they ever knew our full story.
They're like, that's you?
But all that to say, baby steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't, if you've just going through this, don't just start, in fact, I don't think you would, but gushing your story to anybody and everybody, you need to heal. And it takes baby steps, and give yourself grace to take little bitty steps, and you'll know when it's time to take the next bigger step.
And that's the biggest thing. It is a process. You talk about this with grief. Grief is, like I said, it's not stages, it's dealing with elements. And we put too much emphasis on trying to know, well, how do I know? How would I know what I'm supposed to do? Something else. You'll know.
Yeah.
You'll know when it's time to go forward. I've got one more just from me, and then I'll let Stephen finish up with some thoughts, and then Deanna, you can kind of put a bow on the whole thing for us here. In the chapter praying in grief, prayer is so tough in this time. You talked about the prayer of relinquishment versus the prayer of fatalism. That's another chapter that made me uncomfortable. But as I read through it, I realized I knew healing was taking root when I began to pray differently. When I began to pray that prayer of relinquishment. Why is it so important to know the difference? And how do you know when that needle is kind of moved over into the right category?
Yeah, good question. First, let me just say, I knew the right things to do, and as Christians, especially ministers, we know the right thing. We know what a Christian should do, and so that's what I was doing. I was, the prayer of relinquishment comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane, where Christ says, "Not my will, but yours be done." And so I was saying those words in my prayers, but my attitude was one of fatalism. It was one of, because I was so angry. And let's be honest, I was angry at God for allowing these things to happen.
Absolutely.
And so my attitude was more of, well, fine, God, if this is how it's going to be, all right. And that's not the prayer of relinquishment. That puts God as a God who is not engaged in my life, a God who has abandoned me. That's fatalism. The true prayer of relinquishment and again, I finally got there, was a prayer of relinquishment acknowledges God's sovereignty. It's saying, okay, God, and if you look at Christ's prayer, he did not want to go to the cross. He was in agony. He was in such pain. He did not want to go to the cross. He was in dialogue with his Father about this. Is there any other way? But if not, okay, your will, not mine. And so the prayer of relinquishment is one of relationship. You're still talking with the Father, saying, "Oh Lord, this is what I really want. This is what I perceive I really need. Please, please, this is what I want." And you're interacting with the Father. You're seeking his direction. But bottom line, God, you are sovereign. And whatever you decide, okay, I will still love you. I will still worship you. I will still praise you. And so the reason these are such two drastically different prayers, it goes to the attitude of our heart. But a prayer of fatalism is one of, it lacks hope. It's very empty. Whereas the prayer of relinquishment knows that God is sovereign and there is hope in that, that God is in control. He knows all things. He loves us. He cares for us. And there is hope in that prayer. So that very important to know the difference. And again, it's a process and it may take a while to get to that point. But again, I go back to be honest with God. Let him, he knows what you're feeling. He knows what's in your heart. You're not going to hide it from him. So you need to be honest with yourself too.
Wow.